Lisa Gibson jolted awake from the sharp sound that pierced the silence of her bedroom. It was around 3 in the morning when she heard the crackling interference from the old radio sitting on her bedside table. She rubbed her eyes mechanically, trying to remember if she had turned on the radio before going to sleep. The soft hissing escalated into barely distinguishable phrases that sounded like fragments of a radio transmission. Lisa was still in a haze when she heard something that made her heart race. "Help!" A woman's voice trembled with fear, as if every word was a tremendous effort. "They're holding me, in your house." A chill of horror ran down Lisa's spine. She froze, staring into the darkness of her bedroom, then quickly glanced at the door leading into the hallway. Everything was quiet, nothing disrupted the usual peace of her home. Only the faint crackling of the radio, barely audible, blended with the stillness of the night. Trying not to panic, Lisa slowly got out of bed and looked around. The house was empty. A thought raced through her mind: could this just be a dream? After all, she had recently picked up this radio at a flea market, captivated by the antique. Old devices could malfunction sometimes. Maybe it was just a random radio signal intercepted from another frequency? But the woman on the radio said, "Your house." Those words haunted Lisa, forcing her to replay them over and over in her mind. Moreover, the voice sounded so close, so real. Lisa approached the radio and, with trembling hands, switched it off. A strange feeling arose, as if someone was watching her from the darkness of the room. She tried to think rationally, but only one question spun in her head: who was this woman? And what did she mean? The radio was now silent, leaving Lisa alone with the eerie stillness. She glanced around several times, fearing that someone might indeed be in her house. Gathering her courage, she decided to check the basement, the place where a person could seemingly be hidden. The woman's screams and panicked tone from the radio wouldn't leave her mind. Upon entering the basement, Lisa turned on the light. It was always cold and dark down there, but at first glance, she saw nothing suspicious. Only boxes of belongings and old tools sat neatly in their places. Could it really just be a glitch from the old device? Maybe it was picking up signals from another radio channel? But thoughts of someone being in her house returned. Lisa quickly checked all the rooms and windows. Nothing suspicious. Convinced she was alone, she walked back to the radio and placed it where it had been. Nonetheless, she decided not to leave it at that. In the morning, she would reach out to her neighbors and the police. Perhaps someone else had heard those strange signals. But one question tormented her: if this was just a coincidence, why did the voice say the woman was being held in her house? She settled back onto the bed, trembling from the ordeal. Perhaps it was just a trick of her imagination, fueled by fatigue. But Lisa already knew that sleep was no longer waiting for her that night. She lay there with her eyes wide open, listening to every sound in the silence. The next day would bring more questions than answers. Waking up at dawn, Lisa felt shattered. She had spent the entire night unable to sleep, constantly listening to the silence, waiting for the old radio to spring back to life and bring her more chilling messages. By morning, everything seemed less terrifying. But the fear from the previous night still lingered. Lisa picked up the radio, inspecting it closely. It was an antique, with a wooden casing that was patinaed in places by the passage of time. This piece had clearly seen a lot, perhaps dating back to a time when such devices were considered technological marvels. Her gaze lingered on the engraved plate with numbers and letters on the back: Kramer, 1952. This was the very radio she had purchased just a few days ago at a garage sale. Just a few days ago. Lisa recalled how she had been drawn to the radio among a pile of old items. The seller, Mr. Kramer, had seemed strange, even a bit nervous. He hadn't rushed to share the device's story, simply saying, "Take it if you like it. It's old and barely works anyway." At that moment, Lisa had no idea that her new acquisition would bring her such fear. Determined, she put on her jacket and headed to the market where she had bought the radio. The day was sunny and cool, with morning rays filtering through the branches of trees. Lisa felt a bit foolish returning to the place to seek answers about the old radio. But she couldn't ignore what she had heard. Even if it was just a coincidence, she wanted to understand what lay behind the strange signal. The market was already filling with customers who strolled leisurely between the stalls. Lisa quickly found the spot where she had met Mr. Kramer just a few days prior. But where his stall had been, there was only empty space. Mr. Kramer was gone. She walked along the row. But none of the stalls belonged to him. "Excuse me." Lisa addressed an elderly woman behind a nearby stall. "Do you know where the seller of vintage items went?" "I believe his name was Mr. Kramer." "Ah, Kramer," the woman squinted as if recalling. "Yes, he was here. But his stall disappeared yesterday, just like he did. He cleared everything out without a word. Do you have any idea how to contact him?" "I'm afraid not, dear. He was always a bit odd. They said he collected all sorts of junk for years." "Is that old radio of his?" Lisa nodded, feeling anxiety wash over her again. "Yes, the radio. It really works strangely." The woman looked at her with interest but said nothing more. Lisa thanked her and made her way to the exit, lost in thought. Everything felt too suspicious. First, Mr. Kramer vanishing without a trace, and now the radio that seemed to hold some sinister secret. Perhaps she was mistaken, but she had a strong feeling that her purchase was not a coincidence. When Lisa returned home, a new idea sparked in her mind. Maybe it was just a malfunction of the radio, and she needed to figure out how it worked. But before diving in, she decided to search for information about such models online. Opening her laptop, Lisa typed into the search bar, "Old radios model Kramer 1952. A few links led her to antique collector forums. There, she found information about rare radio models used during the Cold War for secret spy transmissions. Some old radios could pick up signals on strange frequencies, intercepting coded messages. Lisa frowned as one article caught her attention. It turned out that such devices were sometimes deliberately modified to receive signals on band wavelengths. She began rereading fragments of the article, and her heart froze. One of the models mentioned looked very much like her radio. "No way," Lisa whispered. The feeling of unease only intensified. What if her radio was indeed connected to something bigger than just an antique? What if she had really heard a signal someone was transmitting? Perhaps it wasn't just random noise, maybe someone was truly calling for help. Still not fully grasping what she was dealing with, Lisa decided it was time to seek help. And if the police wouldn't take her seriously, perhaps a detective could untangle this strange case. She quickly dialed the number of private investigator Mark Bennett, whom friends had once mentioned. Mark was known for his thoroughness and ability to crack the most convoluted cases. That was exactly the kind of person she needed right now. "Bennett here," the calm, confident voice on the other end said. "Hi, my name is Lisa Gibson. I think I have a problem, a strange problem involving a radio. Could you meet with me?" There was a pause in the air before Mark calmly replied. "A radio? All right, come in. We'll sort it out." And Lisa realized that this was just the first step on the path to unraveling the mystery lurking behind the ominous messages she had heard that night. Lisa sat in the cramped office of Mark Bennett, feeling a bit awkward. The dim atmosphere of the detective agency had the vibe of an old movie, the smell of coffee, dusty files, and furniture that seemed to be from the 70s. The detective, a tall man with an insightful gaze, listened intently to her story without interrupting. "So you're saying this radio transmitted a woman's scream, claiming she was being held in your house?" Bennett asked, staring closely at Lisa. "Yes," she confirmed, nervously intertwining her fingers. "I know how this sounds. It could just be a malfunction or some radio signal intercepted from another frequency. But it felt so real. And the voice sounded like she knew she was in my house." Bennett paused for a moment, leaning back in his chair. Lisa noticed he was trying to analyze every detail of her account. "When did you buy this radio?" he finally asked. "About a week ago, at a flea market. The seller disappeared when I tried to track him down." Lisa attempted to convey the essence of the problem as clearly as possible so the detective would understand the seriousness of the situation. "Disappeared? Interesting." Bennett raised an eyebrow. Picking up foreign radio signals isn't uncommon, especially for older models. But the seller's disappearance, that adds a shadow to the picture. He stood up, walked to the window, and lit a cigarette, gazing at the city beyond the glass. "Have you heard of a woman named Caroline Miller?" he asked, not turning around. "Caroline? No, I haven't. Who is she?" Lisa frowned, intrigued by this new detail. Caroline Miller was a journalist. She vanished 3 years ago under mysterious circumstances. Her body was never found, but there are rumors that she was investigating something related to a local crime syndicate. "I worked on that case for a while," but without a body or concrete evidence, everything came to a standstill. Lisa felt a strange unease wash over her. Why was Bennett bringing this up now? Could these events somehow be connected? What does this have to do with me and my radio? She finally asked, voicing her concern. I'm not sure, but there's one detail that caught my attention. Bennett returned to his desk and pulled out an old case folder. Your radio, the 1952 model. Such devices were used in spy operations during the Cold War. Now, take a look at this. He laid out several photographs in front of Lisa. One of them showed a very similar radio sitting on a shelf in Caroline Miller's apartment. This is her apartment. The radio in the photo is the same model as yours. I don't know if it's a coincidence. But you can't just ignore such a resemblance. Lisa felt her heart begin to race. Could her radio be connected to the journalist's disappearance? It seemed unbelievable, but the fact remained. They both belonged to a rare model that had been used for transmitting secret messages. So, could this radio have been modified to receive not just ordinary signals? Lisa tried to grasp the detective's line of thought. Possibly, Bennett confirmed. I suspect that someone used this radio for espionage activities. Caroline, as a journalist, may have stumbled upon this network. And if she really vanished because she found out too much, your radio could be the missing link that helps us understand what really happened. Lisa felt a surge of fear and excitement at the same time. She wanted to put everything back in place, explaining it as coincidence, but the evidence was coming together too well to simply ignore. Do you think the voice I heard, could it have been Caroline? Lisa asked, almost in a whisper. We can't be sure, but if it was her. Bennett pondered, looking at the old documents, perhaps her trail hasn't been lost yet. If she was somehow trying to reach out to the world through this radio, it could mean she's still alive or left some clue that leads to her abductors. A tense silence hung in the air. There's only one way to find out, Bennett finally said, extinguishing his cigarette. We need to listen closely to your radio. There might be something in there that we haven't heard yet. Lisa nodded. Her hands trembled with excitement. She couldn't believe that just a few days ago, she had bought an old radio at a flea market, which was now turning into the key to solving a crime that had occurred 3 years ago. Let's give it a try, she whispered. Evening settled over the city as Lisa and Mark Bennett sat in her living room, surrounded by the soft glow of a lamp. The old radio stood on the coffee table, ready to unveil its secrets once again. Lisa was on edge, but her determination remained. She had to uncover what lay behind these strange signals. Do you have any ideas on what to look for? Lisa asked, glancing at the radio with skepticism. Bennett checked the radio's settings, fiddled with the frequency knob, and then inspected the old device closely. I think we need to play around with the frequencies and find something unusual. These old devices sometimes pick up waves that are no longer used by regular radio stations. I suspect the signal you heard might be coded or transmitted on an unusual frequency. Lisa nervously bit her lip, watching as the detective deftly handled the radio. For a couple of minutes, the room was filled with nothing but quiet static and background noise as Bennett tried different ranges. Occasionally, fragments of conversations, music, and humming flickered through, but nothing significant emerged. Finally, after about half an hour had passed, a familiar sound broke through. A sharp noise, punctuated by a muffled voice, cut through the interference. Wait, Lisa leaned forward. That's it. Mark adjusted the frequency, trying to clarify the sound. Gradually, the voice became more distinguishable, although it remained shrouded in the noise of radio waves. It was a woman's voice, trembling and fearful. They're holding me here, help, in this house. Lisa's throat went dry. The voice was similar to the one she had heard that night, but this time the words sounded clearer and more confident. She felt her heart quicken with each spoken word. It's the same woman, she whispered. Do you hear? Bennett nodded, focused on the settings. He jotted something down in his notebook, noting the frequency and the time. This isn't just an ordinary radio signal, he replied calmly. Hear that noise? It's a coded transmission. It's coming through an unconventional frequency. Someone is intentionally sending these messages. Lisa tensed up. The detective's words were unsettling. It meant that someone was indeed trying to send a signal, and they were doing it deliberately. But how is that possible? And why does she say she's being held in my house? Lisa felt anxiety rising within her. Has this house ever belonged to anyone else? Bennett suddenly asked, looking up at her. Lisa furrowed her brow, puzzled, as she tried to remember. The house had been inherited from her grandmother, who had lived there for many years. Her grandmother always said that the house had its own history, but Lisa had never considered that it might be connected to anything criminal. It belonged to my grandmother, Lisa finally replied. She lived here her entire life until she passed away a few years ago. But I don't know anything about what might have happened in this house before. Mark nodded, deep in thought. Perhaps the secret lies in the house's past. It's possible that the woman transmitting these signals is linked to events that took place here long ago. Maybe the house was used for something you're unaware of. Perhaps she's a victim of past crimes. Or someone used this place for illegal activities. Lisa shuddered at his words. The thought that her home could harbor such dark secrets made her uneasy. Everything had seemed so ordinary, an old house with sturdy walls where she had spent many years, now potentially holding the key to a person's disappearance. What do we do now? She asked, trying to mask the panic in her voice. We need to dig into the history of the house, Bennett said confidently. Find out who lived here before your grandmother. Perhaps one of the previous owners is connected to this. We should also talk to the locals, especially those who have known this area for a long time. They might shed light on the past of this place. And the signal? Lisa nodded toward the radio. We'll keep tracking it, Bennett replied. Now we have the frequency. If this signal is transmitted again, we can record it and possibly find the source. But it's important to understand that this is not just radio, it could be a code or a warning. Someone is trying to reach you. And apparently, it's related to this house. Lisa nodded, feeling her anxiety shift to resolve. Now she had a plan. She couldn't just leave things as they were. If something terrible had indeed happened in her home, she needed to uncover the truth. And if the woman whose voice she had heard was still alive, Lisa had to find a way to help her. There were still many questions ahead, but Lisa knew one thing: this case was just beginning. Morning brought a light fog that enveloped the streets, adding an air of mystery. Lisa woke up with a firm resolve to learn as much as possible about the history of her house. The events of the past few days troubled her so much that she couldn't afford to wait for the situation to clarify itself. After a quick breakfast, she headed to the local library, where archives of old newspapers and land records were stored. The library was cozy, filled with the quiet whispers of visitors leafing through books. Lisa felt that she could find something important here. Hello, she addressed the elderly librarian. I need to learn about the history of the house I inherited. Perhaps you can help? Of course, dear, the librarian replied gently. We have archival records. Just give me the address, and I'll see what I can find. Lisa provided her address and then settled into a corner while the woman retrieved old folders and documents. After a few minutes, the librarian returned with several old newspapers and a file related to her house. Here you go, she said, placing the documents in front of Lisa. There's some information about the previous owners and what happened in this area many years ago. Lisa thanked her and dove into the reading. At first, the documents seemed quite ordinary, information about how the house was built, changes in ownership, and general details. But one article from the 1970s instantly caught her attention. Woman missing in the area. Case opened. The article told the story of a woman named Jennifer Watson, who had gone missing in this area over 40 years ago. She was last seen near Lisa's home. According to witnesses, Jennifer frequently visited this house, as she was acquainted with its then owner, a man named Henry Cavano. However, shortly after her disappearance, Henry abruptly left, and the house was sold to other owners. A chill ran down Lisa's spine. This was the second disappearance connected to her home, and both cases were shrouded in mystery. Perhaps something truly terrible had occurred in this house, and it was linked to the strange signals she had heard on the radio. As she continued reading, she discovered that the Cavano family had owned the house for a long time, but after Jennifer's disappearance, the house changed hands abruptly several times. No other specific information about this period was available, only rumors about the mysterious circumstances surrounding the house's sale. It seemed the locals tried not to remember this story. Jennifer Watson. Lisa spoke the name as if trying to memorize every letter. What happened to you? She made a copy of the article and decided she needed to share this information with Bennett urgently. Lisa had a strong feeling that this missing woman might hold the key to unraveling everything that had been happening in her house. After her visit to the library, Lisa headed to a local bar known for frequently discussing all the latest news and gossip in the area. This was a place where the old-timers could tell more about the past than any archive could. Upon entering, she noticed a few men sitting at the bar who, judging by their age, might remember those events. Lisa ordered a coffee and, gathering her courage, approached one of them. "Excuse me," she began, slightly nervous, "have you lived in this area for long?" "Long enough, dear," replied a gray-haired man with a wry smile. "Almost my entire life. What's on your mind?" "I'm trying to learn about the history of the house on River Street." She tried to speak as calmly as possible to mask her anxiety. "The one where the Cavano family used to live. Do you know anything about it?" The man immediately stopped smiling and looked at Lisa intently. "River Street? The Cavano house? That's a bad story, girl," he said. "You'd better not dig into places where skeletons have long been buried." Lisa frowned, sensing that there was more behind his words. "What do you mean?" "I just want to find out the truth about what happened there." "Legends, rumors," replied another man sitting nearby. "But not all of them are made up. I remember there was a story about a young girl who disappeared. Jennifer, I think. They said she didn't just vanish. The local police couldn't prove anything, but everyone knew that house was off from the start." Lisa felt her heart race. "And what happened to Henry Cavano? Why did he leave?" "Henry was a strange guy," the gray-haired man interjected. "As soon as the girl went missing, he disappeared. No one saw him again. But don't be surprised if there's something in your house that's better left in the past." These words echoed in her mind. Lisa realized that this was no longer a coincidence. The woman whose screams she had heard could be connected to long-ago events in her house. The missing Jennifer, Cavano's disappearance, and now the radio with mysterious messages. Lisa thanked the men for their information and left the bar, trying to process everything she had learned. Now she had a new goal: to find out what happened to Jennifer and how it was connected to her home. When Lisa returned home, she immediately called Bennett and shared her findings. "This is more than just a coincidence," the detective said. "Missing persons, strange messages on the radio. We need to dig deeper. I'll check the information on the Cavano family and Jennifer Watson herself. Perhaps the past of this house will reveal the whole picture to us." Lisa hung up, feeling a mix of fear and determination. The mystery of her house was becoming more tangled, but she knew one thing: with each passing day, she was getting closer to the truth. Lisa couldn't sleep that night. Everything she had learned over the past few days kept swirling in her mind. The story of the missing Jennifer, the mysterious signals, and her own home, which perhaps held terrible secrets. Troubling thoughts wouldn't leave her until the first rays of dawn illuminated the room. Deciding not to waste any time, Lisa contacted Detective Bennett again. They arranged to meet in the morning to discuss their next steps. It seemed to her that every new detail only further complicated the picture. But Lisa knew they had to keep digging. When she arrived at Bennett's office, the detective was already immersed in his notes and documents. "I checked everything you told me yesterday," he began without looking up from the papers. "The Cavano family really did vanish suddenly after Jennifer Watson went missing. The house was sold in haste, and everyone who knew this story claimed that something dark was associated with it. But there is one interesting detail." He placed an old photograph in front of Lisa. It depicted the very house that now belonged to her. But next to the house stood a person, a young man with a stern face and thick dark hair. Lisa recognized him immediately. "Is this Henry Cavano?" she asked, looking at Bennett. "Yes, but the most interesting part is not that. Look closely." The detective pointed to a small antenna protruding from the roof of the house. "This is a transmission antenna. It seems Cavano used this house for some purpose related to radio waves. Perhaps he was the one sending those signals." Lisa felt her heart tighten. The house was indeed connected to radio transmissions, and it couldn't be a coincidence. She recalled the mysterious signals she had heard on the receiver and the woman screaming for help. Perhaps this was the key to unraveling the whole story. But how is this connected to Jennifer's disappearance? Lisa asked, still trying to connect all the dots. "That's what we need to find out," Bennett said, standing up and moving to the window. "Someone may still be using the old radio network set up by Cavano. Or the signals might have been left years ago as some sort of recording that accidentally started transmitting on certain frequencies. But there's one important thing we don't know yet: Where Jennifer went and what happened to Cavano. Lisa nodded, agreeing with the detective. Intuitively, she felt that the solution was closer than it seemed, but there were still many gaps. She understood that action was needed and proposed a more decisive step. We need to get into the basement of my house. I remember there's an old storage room that my grandmother never used. There might be some evidence or traces left that could help us figure out what was happening in the house. Bennett looked at her with slight surprise but quickly agreed. He knew that each new step in this case brought them closer to the answers. Okay, he said, let's go to your house and check the basement. If anything is left from those times, we need to find it. An hour later, they stood in the basement of Lisa's house. The darkness and coolness of the space created a sinister atmosphere. Lisa turned on a flashlight and illuminated the walls and ceiling while Bennett examined every corner. The basement seemed empty, except for an old shelf with tools and a few boxes that hadn't been used in decades. But Lisa's gaze was drawn to an old hatch in the corner of the room that she had never noticed before. What's this? She asked, pointing at the hatch. Bennett approached, illuminated it with his flashlight, and crouched down to inspect it. Looks like a backup exit or a hiding place, he said. It might lead to an underground tunnel. Lisa felt a thrill of excitement. A secret passage in her house? This could be the place where Cavano was hiding something. Bennett tried to open the hatch, and despite the rust, he managed to do so. Beneath it was an old staircase leading down to another room. We need to check what's down there, Bennett said, glancing at Lisa. They carefully descended the stairs. The space under the basement was small, but strange metal boxes and wires running along the walls immediately caught their attention. This is definitely not an ordinary basement, Bennett said, examining one of the boxes. It looks like equipment for radio transmission. Lisa stepped closer and illuminated one of the boxes. It had markings and strange symbols on it. She felt a shiver run down her spine. This place looked like a hideout for some illegal operations. But the most shocking discovery awaited them in the far corner of the room. There, behind a dusty curtain, they found an old trunk. Lisa lifted the lid, and her gaze froze on its contents. Inside lay old clothing, clearly belonging to a woman. This could be Jennifer's clothing, Bennett said quietly, approaching closer. If that's the case, her abduction or even murder could have taken place here. Lisa felt a lump rise in her throat. She was close to the truth, but this truth was far darker than she could have imagined. Lisa and Detective Bennett stood over the old trunk, which contained clothing that clearly belonged to a woman. A grim realization gradually enveloped Lisa's mind. Everything pointed to the fact that Jennifer, who had disappeared 40 years ago, had never left this house. And perhaps her remains were still somewhere here. This is definitely clothing from the 70s, Bennett quietly said as he examined the contents of the trunk. It seems Jennifer really was here. But where is she now? Lisa, feeling a wave of nausea, turned away, trying to fight off the panic. Every new step brought her closer to the understanding that something truly horrific had occurred in her home. We need to examine this thoroughly, she said as her voice steadied a bit. There could be DNA traces or other evidence here. Bennett nodded, pulling out his phone to call for forensic specialists. However, at that moment, Lisa heard muted footsteps from above. The noise was barely audible but distinct. Someone was moving around the house. Her heart froze. Someone is in the house, she whispered, casting a worried glance at the detective. Bennett instantly tensed, putting his phone away and placing a hand on his gun. Stay here, he commanded. I'll check it out. He began to quietly ascend the stairs, trying not to make a sound. Lisa remained below, gripping the flashlight, her hands shaking. Every nerve in her body screamed danger. She understood that the person upstairs was not just a random visitor. Several minutes passed before Bennett came back down. The door to the house was slightly ajar, he said quietly. But I didn't find anyone inside. It's possible someone came in, saw us, and left. Lisa exhaled in relief, but the anxiety didn't subside. Who could it be? And why did they come here now? Perhaps someone is trying to ensure that this secret doesn't come to light, Bennett replied, clenching his fists. They might have heard that you started digging into the past and are now trying to stop us. Lisa felt that with each passing minute, the danger was increasing. Her home had become a stage for dark games, and now she couldn't turn away from it. You need to be careful, Lisa, Bennett said seriously. If this person returns, don't hesitate to call the police. I'll ensure security here, but it's better if you don't stay alone for a while. Lisa realized that the situation was getting more serious. They had already delved too deep into this mystery to simply stop. After the forensic team arrived and took the trunk with the clothing for analysis, Lisa and Bennett returned to the house to discuss their next steps. We can't just sit and wait, Lisa said as they found themselves back in the living room. We need to find out what happened to Jennifer. Maybe some of the old neighbors know something? Bennett nodded. He knew that the only way to learn the truth was to find those who witnessed the events of the past. I'll check old records of the residents in this area. Maybe some of them still live here and can tell us more about Cavano and his disappearance. He said, but we should also try to figure out who might be connected to this house now. Whoever was here today surely has ties to past events. They discussed the need to track down anyone who had previously owned the house or had access to it. Lisa decided to visit the longtime residents in the area. Perhaps they would remember some important details about the Cavano family or Jennifer herself. Lisa spent the rest of the day gathering information about Cavano from the older residents. She visited several homes where elderly people lived, hoping they could recall events from those years. However, most of them were reluctant to speak about Cavano. Some claimed that the family was strange, while others said Cavano was withdrawn and didn't like interacting with the neighbors. But the general atmosphere of caution indicated that the locals knew something but preferred to remain silent. Finally, in one of the homes, Lisa met an elderly woman named Mrs. Mary Jenkins, who had lived in the area for over 50 years. Cavano, yes, I remember them, Mrs. Jenkins said when Lisa asked her about them. Henry was a strange man. His family owned this house for many years. But something happened to him after Jennifer disappeared. I always felt that he was somehow connected to it, but the police never found any evidence. What happened to him after her disappearance? Lisa asked. He just vanished, just like she did, Mrs. Jenkins shrugged. One day his house was empty, and no one has seen him since. They said he moved to another state, but I think he could have perished too. Too many secrets were tied to this house. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. Perhaps the person who had come to the house today was linked to Henry Cavano or his disappearance. Now she was certain that her home was the epicenter of dark events that no one wanted to discuss. There's one more thing you should know, Mrs. Jenkins continued, leaning in closer. Not long before all this happened, I saw Jennifer. She looked scared, as if something was chasing her. She told me she couldn't live here anymore, that someone was tormenting her. Lisa froze. Another piece of the puzzle was beginning to fall into place. Jennifer knew something was wrong in the house. Perhaps she had tried to escape but hadn't succeeded. Thank you for this information, Lisa said as she stood up. It clarifies a lot. Returning home, Lisa felt anxiety wash over her again. Everything around her seemed foreign and sinister. The house, where she once lived peacefully, was now filled with secrets and fear. Sitting in the kitchen, Lisa tried to gather her thoughts. All the evidence pointed to her being on the verge of a revelation, but the thought that someone might be watching her wouldn't let her rest. Lisa sat in the kitchen in complete silence, straining to listen to every rustle. After her conversation with Mrs. Jenkins, anxiety enveloped her, leaving her restless. The realization that her home had been the scene of dark events that had never been uncovered weighed heavily and instilled fear. But Lisa knew she couldn't stop, she had to see it through to the end. Suddenly, something struck the window of the house. Lisa jumped up, gripping the flashlight in her hand, her heart racing. Upon closer inspection, she saw that it was just a branch swaying in the wind, lightly tapping against the glass. But the tension did not dissipate. What if someone is really watching me? She thought, trying to dispel the rising paranoia. Lisa recalled the footsteps she had heard in the house a few hours ago. And cold fear seeped back into her mind. She decided to call Bennett. He had promised to ensure protection and set up surveillance, but the situation was becoming increasingly unsettling. "Hi, it's me again," Lisa said when the detective answered. "You mentioned that someone might be watching me. I feel like something is wrong in the house. I see shadows outside," and her voice trembled. "Stay where you are, I'll be there soon," Bennett quickly replied. "Don't open the door. Don't go near the windows until I arrive." Lisa agreed, hung up, and went into the living room. Now every corner of her house felt filled with a grim threat. Her home was no longer a sanctuary. About 20 minutes later, Lisa heard the quiet sound of a car pulling up. She cautiously peeked out the window and saw Bennett getting out of his car. Relief washed over her for a moment, but it quickly turned into anxiety. Someone could still be watching them. When Bennett entered, Lisa immediately began recounting her feelings and the strange shadows she had noticed. "You were right," he said, listening carefully. "I did a bit of analysis after we got back. It seems that someone might be watching you. I dug up all the old files on the Cavano family and found something interesting. One of the former officers who worked on Jennifer's case didn't live to see the end of the investigation. His death was deemed an accident, but there are many strange details in the documents." Lisa looked at him warily. "Do you think this is connected?" "Possibly. This could be more than just a missing person case. Back when Cavano disappeared, there were rumors that he was involved with some shady people. He could have been connected to criminals, or perhaps he himself was involved in illegal activities. Those who knew too much disappeared or died under strange circumstances. And oddly enough, these stories always revolved around this house." Lisa froze at the realization of how deep this case might go. "Are you saying that all these years, someone could have been watching the house?" she asked, suppressing her fear. "It's quite possible. And now that you've started digging into the past, they may have become active again," Bennett replied. "They may have their reasons for keeping this story under wraps." Lisa felt a chill penetrate every cell of her body. She realized she was at the center of a secret war that had begun long before she arrived in this house. "We need to figure out who's behind this," she said, stepping anxiously toward Bennett. "We can't just wait for them to strike first." "I've already been thinking about that," the detective nodded. "We need to set up hidden surveillance around the house. If someone is indeed watching you, we'll catch them. I'll arrange everything necessary, and we'll try to figure out who it might be." Lisa understood that this was the only way to flush out those who threatened her from the shadows. But she was increasingly troubled by the feeling that once she learned the truth, her life would never be the same. "There's one more thing," Bennett interrupted her thoughts. "I found out that the police archive has records of old phone calls made by Cavano. There might be something among them related to radio signals or Jennifer's disappearance. If that's confirmed, we'll have important evidence." Lisa nodded. All the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, and now she felt that together with Bennett, they were getting closer to the answers that had been hidden for so long. "I'll set up cameras and motion sensors around the house. We'll begin surveillance tonight. If someone shows up, we'll know," the detective said. Night fell over the house as Bennett finished setting up the equipment. Lisa tried to keep calm despite her fear. The cameras captured every corner of her yard, and now all she could do was wait. To watch the shadows lurking in the dark. They sat in the living room, periodically glancing at Bennett's laptop, to which the cameras were connected. "Are you sure there hasn't been anything suspicious up to this point?" Bennett asked. Lisa pondered, replaying the last few weeks in her mind. One small detail caught her attention. "I'm not sure, but it seems that since I bought that radio receiver, something has changed. Perhaps the signals or something else triggered this surveillance mechanism." Bennett listened intently. "It could have been their trigger. Someone might have been monitoring the broadcasts and realized that you heard something important." The hours dragged on slowly. Lisa stared at the screens, watching the footage from the cameras. Trying to catch even the slightest movement. Thoughts swirled in her mind about who could be the person watching her all these days. And suddenly, the screen flickered slightly. Lisa froze. "Bennett, look," she whispered, pointing at the screen. In the footage from the camera set up in the yard, something that resembled a silhouette flashed in the shadows. Lisa and Bennett froze, their eyes glued to the screen. The shadow slowly gliding along the fence appeared ghostly and threateningly vague. Lisa felt her heart pounding in her chest, and she was struggling to breathe. This was not just a shadow, it was someone watching them, someone who knew they were on the right track. "We can't just sit here and wait," Bennett said, standing up. "I'm going to check who it is. You stay here." "No," Lisa exclaimed, grabbing his hand. "It could be dangerous. I'm going with you." The detective looked at her and then nodded. They both knew they had no right to be afraid anymore. Lisa was ready to face the darkness and the unknown. Cautiously, they stepped outside, trying not to make any noise. Silence enveloped the house, and only the nighttime sounds of nature created the illusion of calm. Lisa followed Bennett, holding the flashlight that cast a dim light on the ground. They moved slowly toward the spot where the shadow had been seen. Lisa felt fear and adrenaline intertwining, empowering her. Each step brought them closer to the truth they both sought. Suddenly, Bennett stopped, pressing his hand to his ears. He was listening. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Lisa leaned in, straining to hear. In the distance, there was a sound, thin, yet persistent. It was a quiet voice coming from around the corner. She felt goosebumps rise on her skin. It sounded like what she had heard through the radio receiver. This could be the same voice," she said in a whisper. Bennett nodded, and they cautiously made their way toward the sound. With each step, the voice became clearer. It was calling for help. Lisa recalled the words of the woman she had heard on the radio broadcast, "Help. They're keeping me here." The sounds led them to the backyard, where dense bushes grew. In the beam of the flashlight, they noticed a figure hiding among the shadows. It was a woman, her hair disheveled, and her clothes were worn. "Help." Her voice grew louder. "Please, help me." Lisa realized in horror that this could be Jennifer. But before they could approach her, a hooded man suddenly jumped out of the darkness, blocking their way. "Get out of here," he shouted, his voice full of rage. "This is none of your business." Bennett instantly drew his gun, aiming it at the man. "Step away from her," the detective shouted. "You have 3 seconds to leave." Lisa felt her fear shift into anger. She took a step forward, ready to protect the one who was asking for help. "We won't let you hurt her," she shouted, though her voice trembled with fear. The man turned toward them, his face remaining in shadow. He looked threatening and solidly built. Evil sparks flickered in his eyes. "You don't understand who you're dealing with," he said, clenching his fists. "This woman cannot leave this place. She must stay here." Suddenly, a loud crack echoed, and one of the bushes broke under someone's weight. Lisa turned sharply and noticed another person approaching them from the darkness. This was another figure, clearly prepared to attack. "Get out of here," Bennett shouted, pressing against Lisa. He clearly understood that the situation was becoming dangerous. Everything that was happening made Lisa feel trapped. The mechanism she had set in motion had now become their enemy. "Bennett," she exclaimed, "we have to help her." But the men began to close in. Bennett fired a shot into the air, and the sound rang out like thunder. "Leave now," he shouted again. "I won't warn you twice." The hooded man recoiled, his face twisted with rage and fear. He realized he couldn't handle the detective and his weapon. "You don't understand what you're doing," he shouted before turning and running toward the forest. The other person also quickly disappeared into the darkness. Lisa felt adrenaline surging through her veins. Bennett returned to her, shining the flashlight on the woman who still stood, trembling with fear. "It's okay, we're with you," he said gently, approaching her cautiously. "Jennifer?" Lisa asked, her voice filled with hope. The woman slowly nodded, her face twisted in fear and exhaustion. "I thought you wouldn't come," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "They kept me here, but I heard your voice." "We're here to help you," Lisa said, hugging Jennifer to comfort her. "You're safe." But thoughts of those who had held her captive still swirled in Lisa's mind. She understood that this was just the beginning and that the real danger lay ahead. "We need to get her out of here," Bennett said quietly. "We have to go back to the house and call for backup." Lisa, unwilling to leave Jennifer alone, held her hand tightly. They began to move back toward the house, but the tension lingered. Every sound in the darkness felt like a harbinger of doom. Lisa walked, tightly holding Jennifer's hand. Their hearts beat in unison as they headed back to the house. Bennett walked ahead, cautiously glancing around. Each step sounded like a warning. The night still enveloped the streets, and tension hung in the air. When they entered the house, Lisa immediately locked the door behind them and sank into the cozy comfort of her kitchen. She forced herself to calm down, but the inner turmoil wouldn't subside. "Jennifer, are you okay?" she asked, turning to the woman. Jennifer looked exhausted, her clothes tattered and her hair disheveled. Lisa felt her heart constrict with sympathy. "I don't know how long I've been in that house," Jennifer replied, her voice soft and trembling. "They kept me because I knew too much. I heard them talking about you, Lisa. They know you've started searching for the truth." Bennett, trying to establish order, returned to them. "We need to make sure there's no one else here," he said, surveying the room. "If they are watching you, They need to realize that you're safe. Lisa felt everything around her shifting. She now understood that there was something bigger at play behind Jennifer's disappearance. A dark network was lurking, tying together people whose lives had been shattered. "What did you hear about our investigation?" Bennett asked Jennifer. "I heard conversations while they held me," Jennifer replied, her voice gaining a bit of confidence. "They said that Lisa was a threat and that she needed to be silenced. I couldn't just sit and do nothing. I knew that if anyone could save me, it would be you." "Who did they mean? Who was holding you?" Lisa asked, feeling anxiety rising in her chest. "They called themselves the Network," Jennifer answered. "I heard them discussing old cases related to missing persons. They were doing it for money, as if other people's lives meant nothing to them. I thought I could be next. But when you bought the radio receiver, I realized we had a chance." Lisa froze at those words. The radio receiver, which she thought was just a simple decorative item, turned out to be the key to uncovering a dark truth. "This changed everything. You talked about cries for help," Bennett said, narrowing his eyes. "Did you hear anything specific that could lead us to them?" "Yes," Jennifer replied, crying from fear. "I heard their names. They mentioned Cavano and Teddy. They knew Cavano was important, and he might be key to our investigations." Lisa remembered the old records Bennett had found in the archives. An idea sparked in her mind. "Bennett, we need to go back to those records. There might be information about Cavano and his connection to the network." "Good thought," the detective agreed, looking at Jennifer. "But we need to be careful. We don't know who might be watching us." They quickly gathered and began reviewing old records about Cavano. Lisa flipped through the pages, trying to find anything that could shed light on the dark secrets. Time flew, and each new page heightened her excitement. "Here," she said, pointing to one of the pages, "this is a record of Cavano seeing suspicious people watching him. Maybe this will help us figure out who's really behind all this." Bennett examined the records closely and made notes. Lisa felt her heart race. They were getting closer to the solution, and each new step sharpened their focus. "There's something else we could do," Bennett said, his eyes sparkling with determination. "We need to track down everyone connected to Cavano and the network. If they were all involved in this, they might know something about Jennifer and those who held her." Lisa nodded, her thoughts racing. Now they had a plan, and they had to move quickly. "But before we continue, we need to ensure Jennifer's safety," Lisa added. "She shouldn't be left alone." Bennett nodded, and they decided that Jennifer would stay with them until more information was found. They sat down at the table, preparing for a long night filled with plans and reflections. Lisa realized that each step of their investigation carried danger, but now that they had an ally and a clear goal, she felt they could face any difficulties that might arise. The uncertainty weighed heavily, but Lisa was ready to fight for the truth, for Jennifer, and for her own life. Now it all depended on them. The early morning light streamed through the windows as Lisa, Bennett, and Jennifer sat around the table, surrounded by old records and printouts Lisa had gathered over the past few days. Cold coffee cups stood before them, and the ticking clock reminded them of the relentless passage of time. Each of them understood that every minute was crucial. "We need to talk to those who knew Cavano," Bennett said, pulling out one of the printouts. He had a business partner named Stanley. He might know who Cavano was in contact with. Lisa nodded, reading the records. The partner seemed to be involved in shady dealings and might have access to information about the network. "He has a criminal record," she added, pointing to a page. "Stanley has been arrested multiple times for fraud and smuggling. He might have been involved in cases of missing persons. We can find out where he is now," Bennett noted, "but we need to be careful. If Cavano really had connections to the network, this Stanley could be dangerous." Lisa sighed, feeling the tension rising. She glanced at Jennifer, who still looked shaken, but now, being together, there was a spark of hope in her eyes. "We need to act quickly," Lisa said, clenching her fists. "He could be our only lead." Bennett picked up the phone and began dialing a number. Lisa waited anxiously as he contacted the police to gather information about Stanley's whereabouts. They knew they couldn't afford to delay. After a few minutes of waiting, Bennett hung up the phone and turned to them with a determined look on his face. "He lives nearby, in an old neighborhood filled with abandoned buildings." "We can go there," the detective said. Lisa nodded, and they gathered their things and left the house. Excitement filled the air as they got into the car. Lisa glanced at Jennifer sitting beside her, her face reflecting both fear and determination. On the way, they discussed the best approach to Stanley. Lisa suggested using her communication skills to try and extract the necessary information from him. I know how to handle people, she said, looking confidently at Bennett. I can pretend I need help. If he feels I'm vulnerable, he might be more forthcoming. That's risky, Bennett remarked. But we don't have time to hesitate. If we have even the slightest chance of learning the truth, we must seize it. Soon they arrived at Stanley's address. It was an old, weather-beaten building surrounded by debris and thick trees. Lisa felt a wave of fear wash over her, but her determination pushed her forward. I'll go in alone, she said, stopping at the door. You'll be nearby, but I have to go in by myself. Bennett, about to protest, simply nodded. He understood they couldn't afford to create extra noise. Lisa approached the door and knocked. Her heart raced as she waited for a response. It took a few moments before the door creaked open, revealing a man with tangled hair and a disgruntled expression. What do you want? He asked, his voice sounding displeased. Hi, I'm Lisa, she introduced herself, trying to appear confident. I heard you might be able to help me. I need to know about Kavano. Stanley squinted, assessing her. He was clearly wary. Why should I share anything with you? He asked, crossing his arms over his chest. Lisa took a step forward, trying to create an atmosphere of trust. I'm in trouble, and I need to know what happened to my friend. I know you knew him and might be able to help me, she said, adding a note of fear to her voice. Stanley paused, his eyes glinting as if weighing what to do next. All right, he finally said, but if I see any of your friends, we're done talking. Lisa turned and saw Bennett and Jennifer standing a bit away, but ready to intervene if necessary. She nodded, understanding this was a risk they had to take. Stanley gestured for her to come inside, and Lisa stepped into the darkness of the apartment. The smell of old furniture and mildew filled the air. She could feel the tension mounting. It was either a trap or a chance to learn the truth, she couldn't know in advance. Sit down, Stanley said, pointing to an old sofa. Lisa sat down, trying to appear calm, even though fear twisted inside her. Do you really want to know about Kavano? He asked, leaning against the wall. He dealt with dangerous people with the network. I don't know how deep you are into this. I know they hold people, she said, trying to sound confident. I want to know where to find them. Stanley laughed, his laughter sounding insane. You seem to not understand who you're dealing with, he said. The network doesn't forgive. They could kill you for interfering. Lisa couldn't believe her ears. This man knew more than he was letting on, and she had to find out what it was. If you know something, tell me, she insisted, her voice becoming more assertive. I'm not afraid. I have to know the truth. Stanley looked at her, and doubt flickered across his face. All right, he said, I can tell you where to find them. But be careful, and don't tell anyone I told you. Lisa felt her heart stop. This was the chance they had been waiting for. Where? She asked, holding her breath. Stanley leaned closer and whispered an address that sent dread through her soul. It was an abandoned building on the outskirts of town, rumored to be a hideout for criminals. If you go there, be prepared that you might not come back, he added, his voice turning cold. Lisa looked him in the eyes and realized she couldn't stop now. She had no choice. They had to keep going before it was too late. Lisa, Bennett, and Jennifer drove away from the area where Stanley lived. Lisa felt excitement building in her chest as they headed toward the abandoned building Stanley had mentioned. Every minute of the journey only heightened the tension. Are you sure this is a good idea? Bennett asked, his voice serious. We might stumble upon something unexpected. Lisa nodded, but her resolve only strengthened. We can't afford to back down. If people are really being held there, we have to do everything we can to save them, she said. Jennifer needs to know she hasn't been forgotten. Jennifer sat in the back seat, her face pale but with a glimmer of hope in her eyes. I believe we can do this, she encouraged Lisa. I know you can handle it. As they approached their destination, the building grew increasingly ominous. It looked abandoned, with cracked walls and broken windows. Lisa felt fear gripping her, but at the same time, her determination grew stronger. We need to approach quietly, Bennett whispered as they got out of the car. Try to make no noise. I don't want to be spotted until we figure out what's happening inside. They approached the door, and Bennett, being the most experienced, pushed it open. The door creaked, and they cautiously stepped into the darkness. Inside, it was dusty and neglected. Lisa switched on her flashlight, and the beam danced across the old walls. "It looks like no one has been here for a long time," she remarked, scanning the space. "They might be using this place as a hideout," Bennett observed, looking around carefully. "We need to check every room." They began exploring the premises, moving carefully through the hallways. Lisa felt her heart pounding with fear and anticipation. Every rustle sent her into a panic. She knew they could encounter something dangerous at any moment. Suddenly, Jennifer stopped and pointed to a door that was slightly ajar. "There," she said quietly. "I feel like there's someone in there." Bennett nodded, and they carefully approached the door. Lisa steadied herself and gently pushed it open. The door swung wide, revealing a large room filled with old crates and boxes. "It looks like something valuable was stored here," Bennett noted, peering into one of the boxes. "But now it's just junk." Lisa took a closer look and noticed an old radio in the corner of the room. She approached it, her heart racing. "Maybe it still works," she said, trying to figure out how to turn it on. "Wait, Lisa." Bennett stopped her, looking in another direction. "Do you hear that?" Lisa froze and listened. Faint voices came from behind the wall, growing louder. "It could be someone from the network," Bennett said. "We need to be careful." They started moving toward the sound, trying to remain unnoticed. Lisa led the way, her breath becoming shallow with excitement. She didn't know what they would find, but deep down, she understood this could be their last chance to save the people being held. They approached a door leading to another room. Lisa crouched down and peered through the keyhole. She saw a group of men discussing something around a table. "That's them," she whispered. "They're from the network." Bennett reached for the doorknob, but Lisa stopped him. "Wait, we don't know how many are in there," she said. "We need to understand what they're talking about." They decided to wait and listen. Lisa focused on the words echoing from the room. "If we don't stop her, she could ruin everything," one of the men said. "She's too close to the truth. We need to take her out before she finds us," another replied. "Kavano won't be happy if she interferes." A chill ran down Lisa's spine. They were talking about her. "And what do we do about those we're holding?" A third voice asked. "We can't leave any witnesses." Lisa exchanged glances with Bennett and Jennifer. They didn't have time to think. They had to act. "We need to find a way out and alert the police," Lisa whispered. "If they're planning to kill someone, we can't let that happen." They began to cautiously retreat toward the exit when suddenly the door beside them swung open. One of the men, noticing them, started shouting, "Hey, who's there?" Lisa instantly darted back, but it was too late. Bennett shoved her toward the exit, and they ran down the corridor as the men began to chase after them. "Run," he shouted, and Lisa and Jennifer followed him, trying not to look back. They burst out into the street and quickly jumped into the car. Bennett started the engine, and they sped away, leaving the abandoned building and their pursuers behind. "What now?" Jennifer asked, her voice trembling with fear. "We need to report this to the police," Bennett said, looking at Lisa. "We have to stop them before they do something terrible." Lisa nodded, her heart still racing from the adrenaline. They were on the edge, and now they had information that could help expose the network. But time was running out, and they knew their adversaries wouldn't sit idly by. Lisa, Bennett, and Jennifer sped down the road, the wind whistling through the open windows, but Lisa's mind was preoccupied with what they had just experienced. Her heart raced, and the feeling of anxiety wouldn't leave her. She knew they had to report this to the police, but what consequences could it have for all of them? "We need to call the police," Lisa said, turning to Bennett. "We can't leave this unaddressed." "Yes, but we have to be careful," Bennett replied, focused on the road ahead. "If the network finds out we reported them, they might try to find us." "What are we supposed to do?" Jennifer asked, her voice trembling. "We can't just sit here and do nothing." "I'll make the call," Bennett said, pulling out his phone. "But first, we need to find a safe place." They drove several blocks before stopping in the back of a small cafe where Lisa often had lunch. It was quiet here, and they could hide from prying eyes. Bennett got out to call the police while Lisa and Jennifer stayed in the car, exchanging tense glances. "We're in a lot of danger," Jennifer said, clasping her hands on her knees. "They could come after us." "Don't think like that," Lisa tried to reassure her. "We'll do everything we can to stop them." After a few minutes, Bennett returned, his expression serious. "The police are on their way," he said. "But they can't guarantee our safety. They need time to gather evidence." "But we don't have time," Jennifer exclaimed, tears filling her eyes. "What if they kill the people they're holding?" "We need to act quickly," Bennett said, his voice resolute. "If we can find the people they're holding, it will be a strong argument for the police." Lisa felt the internal tension rise. She knew they had to find the people before it was too late. "We know where they're being held," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We need to go back to the building and try to save them." "Are you sure?" Bennett asked, concern etched on his face. "It's too risky. If we don't try, someone might die. We have to do this," Lisa insisted. Soon they were back in the car, heading toward the abandoned building again. Lisa felt fear wash over her, but she couldn't back down. Behind every door, around every corner, there could be lives that needed help. When they arrived at the building, Lisa noticed the street was empty, and everything looked quiet. Bennett looked at her, and they exchanged knowing glances. "We need to be quiet," he said, gathering his things. "If someone's inside, they might hear us." They entered the building again, and Lisa switched on her flashlight, illuminating the dark corridors. An ominous silence filled the space, and each step was difficult. Lisa felt the tension building, but she knew she couldn't stop. They approached the door that led to the room where they had heard voices. Lisa paused to listen. This time, everything was silent, and her heart raced. "I'll go first," she said, feeling it was her responsibility. She slowly opened the door, and they stepped into the room. There was no one inside, but Lisa immediately noticed that one of the walls was covered in dirt and marks, as if someone had tried to escape. A surge of determination rose in her chest. "We need to keep looking," she said, and Bennett nodded, scanning the room. They continued to explore the building and soon stumbled upon a staircase leading down to the basement. Lisa knew it could be dangerous, but something inside urged her that they needed to go down. "Are you sure?" Bennett asked, his voice filled with doubt. "Yes, I feel like we need to go there," she replied, trying to mask her fear. She began to descend the stairs, and Jennifer and Bennett followed her. When they reached the lower level, they found themselves in a dark, damp basement. Lisa switched on her flashlight again, illuminating the narrow corridors. At the end of one, she noticed a door slightly ajar and, getting closer, heard faint voices. "It must be there," she said, her heart racing. They cautiously opened the door and peered inside. What they saw made Lisa freeze in horror. Several people were inside, tied up and locked away. Their faces were filled with fear and hope. "Oh my God, we found them," Jennifer whispered, her voice breaking with tears of joy. "We need to free them," Lisa said, scanning the room. She noticed one of the young men had a blindfold over his eyes. "Give me a knife," Bennett said, quickly looking around. He found a piece of old glass and handed it to Lisa. Lisa approached the captives and began carefully cutting their ropes. Meanwhile, Bennett checked the corridor while Jennifer held the flashlight. "We came to save you," Lisa said as they began to break free. "The police are on their way." The people started to stir, their faces expressing hope and gratitude. But suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed, approaching the door. "Hurry," Lisa shouted, her heart racing. "We need to move." They finished freeing the captives, and the group, gathered together, tried to move as quietly as possible. But the doors began to creak, and voices were heard in the corridor. "Someone's here," one of the men from the network said. "Search for them." Lisa felt fear grip her, but she knew she couldn't back down. They had to get out of there alive. "We need to go to the exit," she whispered, pointing to another corridor. Quickly, everyone rushed toward the exit, but just as they began to move, the doors they had hidden behind swung open. Several men in black jackets entered the room, their eyes blazing with fury. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" one of them shouted, and Lisa realized they had no time. "Run," Bennett yelled, pushing them forward. They bolted for the exit, but sounds of pursuit echoed behind them. Lisa sprinted ahead, her breath coming in gasps, and she felt her strength fading. When they burst outside, Lisa turned and saw several men chasing them. She understood that they were now in danger. "Hurry, get in the car," Bennett shouted, and they all rushed toward the vehicle. Lisa hopped into the back seat with Jennifer, while Bennett climbed behind the wheel. He started the engine, and they sped away, leaving the darkness of the abandoned building and their pursuers behind. "We did it," Lisa said, feeling the fear gradually dissipate. But they knew this was just the beginning. Now they had a group of people who could help expose the network, but the threat still loomed in the air. Lisa knew that the fight for the truth was only just beginning. After they escaped from the basement, Lisa felt an immense responsibility on her shoulders. In the car, surrounded by the group of freed individuals, silence reigned, and everyone anxiously awaited what would happen next. "We need to find a safe place urgently," Bennett said, his voice resolute. "If the network learns we've freed people, they will come after us." Lisa nodded, unable to take her eyes off Jennifer. The quiet joy she felt from rescuing people was overshadowed by the fear for their fate. "I know a place," Jennifer said, her voice confident. "My aunt has a house not far from here. It's secluded and safe." "Good," Bennett replied, turning the car. "Let's head there." As they drove, Lisa reflected on everything that had happened. They knew they didn't have time, and every moment counted. They had to act quickly to prevent the network from regrouping. When they arrived at Jennifer's aunt's house, Lisa felt a flicker of hope. It was an old but sturdy house surrounded by trees and greenery. They quickly got out of the car and went inside. "We need to make sure no one knows we're here," Lisa said, looking around. "Make sure the windows are closed and the doors are locked." They all sat at the table in the cozy kitchen, and Lisa addressed the group of freed individuals. Their faces were pale, but their eyes burned with a desire to know what would happen next. "We can't let this go unanswered," she said, looking at them. "The network held you captive, and now we have to do everything we can to stop them." "We need to inform the police," said one of the freed men named Kyle. "We have evidence, and we can help you expose them." "Yes, but we need to be careful," Jennifer added. "If they find out we're here, they might try to track us down." Lisa nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. "We can use Jennifer's aunt's phone to call the police and report our location," she suggested. "But first, we need to make a plan." "A plan? What kind of plan?" Kyle asked, his voice full of doubt. "We need to determine where the network's main office is. If we can gather evidence of their crimes, the police will have to act," Lisa explained. "And how do we do that?" asked another freed woman named Mary. "We need to find information. Maybe someone among us has contacts who can help," Lisa replied. "We can split into groups and operate separately to avoid drawing attention." Bennett nodded, understanding that time was not on their side. "I can make the calls and find out who among my contacts can help us," he said. "I'll also check social media. Maybe someone has already posted information about the network." "I can assist with online research," Jennifer offered. "I know some websites where we can find data about local groups." Lisa turned to the freed individuals. "And you," she said, "can help us search for information about what happened with the network. If you have any memories of what you were told while in captivity, that could be useful." The group began exchanging information, and Lisa felt her heart fill with hope. They could form a team fighting for the truth. After a while, once everyone was prepared, Lisa gathered the group. "We need to be careful and act quickly," she said. "We must gather evidence that the police can use against the network." Bennett raised his hand. "I'm ready to make the calls, but we also need to think about what to do if they start pursuing us. We need to know how to protect ourselves." Lisa pondered this. "We can create a hideout here," she said. "I mean, we can use this house to store supplies so we always have food and water on hand. We must be ready for any situation." Everyone agreed, and they began to prepare. Lisa packed a few items into a bag, and they started setting up the hideout. It gave her a sense of control over the situation. Once everything was ready, Bennett made the calls, and Jennifer searched for information online. Lisa stayed with the freed individuals, listening to their stories. It was difficult, but she understood that it was necessary to know what they were dealing with. Finally, after several hours, Bennett returned with new information. "I spoke with a friend in the police, and he said they have information that the network is planning to conduct a deal next week," he said. "This could be our chance." "A deal? What are you talking about?" Lisa asked. "They will be exchanging captives for money," Bennett replied. "This could be our opportunity to track them down." Lisa felt a sense of determination rising within her. "We have to prepare. If we can intervene in this deal, it might be our chance to stop them once and for all." Gathered together, they discussed the details. Everyone understood that this operation would be dangerous, but it was the only way to freedom. Lisa felt her resolve growing, and she knew that together they could do this. The morning dawned cold and gray, and Lisa struggled to get out of bed. She knew today was a decisive day. They had all gathered in the cozy kitchen of Jennifer's aunt's house to discuss the final details of their plan. A mix of excitement and fear hung in the air. "We cannot afford to make mistakes," Lisa said, her voice firm. "This might be our only chance to stop the network. We need to be careful and act quickly," Bennett added, studying the maps and notes they had gathered. "If the deal goes through, we need to know where and when." "I have a few friends who can help us," Jennifer said, her face focused. "They know the city and can provide information about the network's location." "Great," Lisa nodded. "We need to find out when they plan to hold the deal and where. We can use that time to prepare." During the discussion, Bennett presented a diagram marking the places where he thought the deal might take place. Lisa looked at the map, realizing they needed to be extremely cautious to avoid falling into a trap. "I think we should split into 2 groups," Lisa suggested. "One group will watch the location where the deal is supposed to happen, and the other will look for an opportunity to intervene." Everyone agreed with the plan. Soon, they split into groups. Lisa, Bennett, and Jennifer decided to head to the suspected location of the deal, while the freed individuals remained in hiding to monitor the situation outside and be ready to help. When they arrived at the location, Lisa felt the tension building. It was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by a high fence and overgrown with weeds. She felt a wave of fear wash over her, but she knew she had to be strong. "We need to find cover to observe what's happening," Bennett said, looking around. "If we get too close, they might notice us." They chose a small cabin near the warehouse where they could hide and keep an eye on the situation. Lisa glanced at her watch. The time was approaching when the deal was supposed to start. Her heart raced, and she realized this was not just a fight for the truth, but a fight for lives. "Let's stay in touch," Jennifer said, checking her mobile device. "I set up a messaging app so we can stay connected." "Okay," Bennett said, tucking his phone into his pocket. "We need to know when they start." The hours dragged on, and time moved slowly. Lisa watched the warehouse, her mind filled with worries. But suddenly, as she glanced toward the entrance, her heart stopped. She saw several men in black jackets getting out of a car and heading toward the warehouse door. "It's them," Lisa whispered, her voice filled with horror. "Quick, we need to prepare," Bennett shouted, his voice full of determination. They quickly positioned themselves in cover, watching as the men entered. Lisa held her breath, her thoughts focused on what they needed to do. Time was running out. "We have to wait until they start the deal," Jennifer said, "then we'll have a chance to intervene." Lisa nodded, clenching her fists. She understood this was their only chance to get it right. Watching the men from the network interact, she felt her heart race. Gradually, the internal tension mounted. Finally, one of the men came outside, his face tense, holding a briefcase. "This is the moment," Lisa whispered. "We need to act." "Let's go," Bennett said, his voice filled with confidence. "We have to do this." They rushed out of hiding and headed toward the warehouse. Lisa felt adrenaline coursing through her body, and at that moment, all her fears disappeared. They had to do this for the freed individuals and for themselves. As they got closer, Lisa noticed that inside the warehouse someone was standing, holding the people they had rescued. Her heart sank in horror as she saw the captives guarded. "Stop," Lisa shouted, her voice loud and confident. All eyes turned to them, and the men in black jackets froze. Lisa realized this was their only chance. "You are surrounded," Bennett shouted, his voice authoritative. "Let the people go." The men in black jackets began to stir, their faces reflecting shock and anger. "What are you doing?" One of them stepped forward, and Lisa felt her fear returning. But she couldn't back down. Behind them, there was noise. It was the freed individuals who had also approached, ready to fight. "We won't let you take them," Lisa declared, her voice resolute. At that moment, a fight broke out. Lisa and Bennett struggled to protect the freed individuals. She felt adrenaline pulsing through her, and each blow was filled with determination. The battle raged with ferocious strength. Lisa struck and dodged as each network member tried to grab her. "We will not back down," she shouted, her voice rising above the noise of the fight. When Bennett knocked one of the men down, Lisa felt hope returning. They could do this. Suddenly, Lisa noticed one of the freed individuals charging forward, his face filled with determination. He rushed toward his captors. And in that moment, everything changed. Lisa continued to fight, and soon police cars began to arrive at the scene, their sirens breaking the silence. Lisa felt her heart swell with hope. Voices of the police rang out as they began to disperse the network members. Lisa understood this was not just a victory but the beginning of a new path. As the police handcuffed the last men and freed the captives, Lisa felt a weight lift off her shoulders. They had done it. They had freed the people and stopped the network. She turned to Bennett and Jennifer, and their faces shone with joy. This was the moment they had been waiting for, and now their struggle had borne fruit. "We did it," Lisa said, her voice filled with relief and happiness. "Yes, we did," Bennett agreed, his eyes shining with emotion. At that moment, one of the police officers approached them, and Lisa felt her heart soar with joy. This was their hour of victory. After the operation concluded, chaos reigned on the street where the events had unfolded. Police cordoned off the area, taking notes and speaking with the freed individuals, who were still in a state of shock. Lisa, Bennett, and Jennifer stood to the side, trying to process everything that had happened. "We did it," Lisa said, still feeling the adrenaline rush. "But this is just the beginning." "Yes," Bennett agreed, his face showing fatigue but his eyes shining with determination. "We need to ensure that the network can no longer harm anyone." Lisa turned to Jennifer. "You know what to do, right? How can we get information on them now?" Jennifer nodded, her voice serious. "I can reach out to those who are still captive and find out what they know. Perhaps we can discover where their main offices are and who else is involved in this." At that moment, a young police officer approached them, his expression serious. "Thank you for helping to free these people," he said. "We have information about the network, but your testimonies could be crucial." Lisa felt hope ignite within her. "We are ready to share everything we know," she said, looking into the officer's eyes. The officer nodded and handed them his contact information. "Once you gather information, get in touch with me. We will begin an investigation, and we have a chance to hold all the participants accountable." Lisa looked at him with hope. "We will do everything we can," she said confidently. After the officer left, they decided to return to Jennifer's aunt's house. Lisa realized that their lives would never be the same. They had become part of something bigger, and now they needed to rebuild their existence. On the way, Lisa tried to imagine how they would return to normal life. But she quickly understood that this was impossible. The psychological trauma they had all experienced had left an indelible mark. "How soon do you think we can start a new life?" she asked Bennett. "I don't know," he shrugged. "We need time to process everything. But we have to stick together." They arrived at the house and settled into the cozy kitchen. The atmosphere was tense, yet filled with hope. Lisa looked at the freed individuals. They looked tired, but relief was evident on their faces. "We need to help them adapt," she said, looking at Jennifer. "We have experience, and we can do something for them." "Yes," Jennifer agreed. "We need to organize support and assistance. I know a few organizations that can help." Soon, they began discussing how to assist the freed individuals. Each of them shared their thoughts, and a plan gradually began to take shape. They decided to start with psychological support and rehabilitation. Lisa felt hope igniting in her heart. They had not only freed people but had also become defenders who could help others. A few days later, Lisa, Bennett, and Jennifer organized a meeting with local organizations that supported victims. They held discussions and secured resources to assist those who had suffered from the network. Lisa understood that this work would require a lot of effort, but she was ready. They were united in their desire to make the world better. And that inspired her. "This is really important," Lisa said, her voice sounding resolute. "We can help others and ensure that no one else suffers." Bennett nodded. "Yes, and this will be our mission. We must give people the opportunity to speak about their suffering and help them recover." Lisa felt her strength growing. She knew she had a team with which she could tackle any challenges. Finally, after several months of hard work, they were able to launch a support program for the victims of the network. Lisa felt her life changing. She had become an active participant in the fight for people's rights and freedom, and this was her calling. But soon, Lisa realized that the network was still operating in the shadows. Her work was not over. Lisa felt she couldn't afford to relax until every member of the network was held accountable. "We still have a lot of work to do," she said, looking at Bennett and Jennifer. "And I won't stop until I've dealt with them once and for all." They all understood that the road ahead would be difficult. But together they were ready for the challenge. Lisa clenched her fists, her determination unshakable. A new phase of their lives lay ahead, not just rebuilding but also fighting for the truth. Despite Lisa and her team's significant progress in the fight against the network, the darkness in which they operated still lingered. They knew that the organization was still active, and its members would not stop until they got their revenge. A few months after launching the support program, Lisa woke up with a sense of unease. She had a feeling that something was wrong. She jumped out of bed and checked her messages. As she suspected, several freed individuals had begun arriving at the rehabilitation center with new stories of strange incidents and threats. "They know we're helping," Jennifer said when Lisa shared this with her. "They might be trying to intimidate us or bring back those who escaped." "We can't let them do that," Lisa declared resolutely. "We must protect those who are still in danger." Bennett, sitting at the table, looked at them with a worried expression. "I've heard that the network is becoming more aggressive. They need to stop us, and they might resort to extreme measures." Lisa nodded, her mind racing with questions. How could they stop this organization once and for all? "We need to expand our connections," she said. "If we have more information about them, we can anticipate their actions." The team began gathering data. Lisa spent her evenings studying details, searching for information online, talking to the freed individuals, and collecting testimonies about what had happened to them after their escape. One evening, while they were at the center, one of the freed individuals, Jason, approached them. He looked anxious and confused. "Lisa, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice trembling. She looked up and saw that he was nervous. "What happened, Jason?" "I saw them again. They're looking for the people who escaped, and I know they're coming for us." Lisa felt her heart race. "Are you sure?" she asked, trying to stay calm. Jason nodded, his face serious. "I saw them in the city. They were asking about us, about those who were at the center. They're trying to figure out who can help." Lisa turned to Bennett and Jennifer, her expression tense. "We need to take action," she said. "We can't let them take people back." "What do you suggest?" Jennifer asked, her voice filled with concern. "We need to create protection for the freed individuals. Perhaps we should reach out to local authorities to conduct raids and check places where the network might be hiding." Bennett pondered this. "That could work, but we need to be careful. If they sense a threat, they might resort to extreme measures to cover their tracks." "We can't stand by," Lisa said, her voice filled with determination. "They won't stop until they get their victims back." The team decided to start by organizing around-the-clock protection for the freed individuals. Lisa contacted the local police, and they agreed to collaborate. Soon, additional security personnel began working at the rehabilitation center. Lisa and her team started conducting training sessions for the freed individuals, teaching them how to protect themselves and report any suspicious activities. The next day, during another session, Lisa felt the atmosphere growing tense. The freed individuals attending the training looked anxious. Lisa knew that fear continued to haunt them, and this was her main concern. "We must be ready for anything unexpected," she said as the training concluded. "If you see anything strange or feel threatened, notify us immediately." The freed individuals nodded, but their expressions revealed their fear. "Lisa, we know you're trying to help, but what if they come back?" one of them asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. "We will be ready," she answered confidently. "We won't give them a chance." Days passed, and Lisa felt the mounting tension. She knew the network could attack at any moment, but still hoped that their preparations would help prevent it. One evening, as she was returning home, her phone rang. It was Bennett. "Lisa, you need to come to the center immediately. We have a problem." She felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. "What happened?" "One of the freed individuals, Jason, is missing. No one has seen him since the morning." Lisa clenched her teeth, her heart racing. "We have to find him," she said. "I'm on my way." When Lisa arrived at the center, the atmosphere was tense. The freed individuals had gathered in a circle, their faces showing fear and worry. "We can't stay here," Jennifer said, her voice trembling. If they came for Jason, they might come for us too. We need to act, Lisa declared, clenching her fists. We must find out where he has gone and who is behind this. Bennett approached her, his expression serious. I have an idea. I can try to reach out to people who work in our area and see if they've noticed anything suspicious. Do that, Lisa nodded, her heart pounding in anticipation. Jennifer and I will check places where Jason might have been. They split into groups, and Lisa and Jennifer began searching nearby streets and neighborhoods, asking passers-by questions. Every step they took was filled with anxiety. We need to be careful, Jennifer said. If the network is indeed in town, they might notice us. Lisa nodded, but her determination only grew stronger. They walked through the streets, checking every hiding spot, every abandoned building where Jason might be. Suddenly, as they passed by one of the abandoned factories, Lisa noticed something strange, a car with tinted windows parked near the door. Her instincts kicked in. Wait, Jennifer, she whispered. Let's check this place. They approached the car cautiously, and Lisa felt fear gripping her. With her heart pounding in her chest, she stepped closer to the car door and listened. Suddenly, the door swung open sharply, and a man stepped out. What do you want? He said, his voice rough. Lisa and Jennifer froze, but Lisa couldn't back down. We're looking for Jason, she said, her voice steady. Where is he? The man smirked, and in his eyes, Lisa saw a mockery. You're not in the right place at the right time, girls. Stay out of our business. That was enough for Lisa. Anger surged within her, and gathering all her strength, she stepped forward. We won't back down, she said. We know what you're doing. In that moment, a thought flashed through her mind, that this could be a trap. She needed to act quickly. Run, Jennifer, she screamed as she sensed the situation escalating. Jennifer immediately turned and began to run, while Lisa stood her ground, ready for any consequences. Suddenly, several men in black clothing emerged from around the corner. You're not leaving here, one of them said. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. The men in black clothing surrounded her, and she knew this could be the end of their struggle. Emotions swirled within her, fear, anger, and determination. She wasn't going to give up. You won't take me, she said, trying to speak confidently. In response, one of the men sneered. We know what you're doing, and this won't end well for you. At that moment, her instincts kicked in, and Lisa recalled everything she had learned over the past few months. She suddenly turned and ran toward the factory, hoping to find shelter. Behind her, she heard shouts and footsteps as the men began to pursue her. Lisa knew she needed to escape this nightmare. She glanced back and noticed that Jennifer had disappeared in another direction. She had to get to a place where they could call for help. She dashed through the factory's open doors and found herself in a dark corridor. There were many crates and old equipment around. Lisa hid behind one of the crates and tried to catch her breath. Hearing approaching footsteps, she realized she couldn't stay in one place. She ran further down the corridor, searching for an exit. Suddenly, she spotted an old staircase leading to the second floor. As she climbed the stairs, she felt her heart pounding in sync with the footsteps of her pursuers. Lisa made it to the second floor and saw many windows. I need to find a way to call for help, she thought. She rushed to one of the windows and looked outside. Seeing a police car parked nearby, she began to pound on the glass. Hey, over here, help, she shouted, but the street sounds drowned out her cries. Suddenly, she heard footsteps approaching her. Lisa couldn't wait any longer. She turned and began looking for another way out. Her instincts urged her to act quickly. After running through several rooms, she stumbled upon a door leading to the roof. This is my only chance, she thought, and dashed outside. On the roof, there were several old structures, and she quickly scanned the area, trying to find a way to attract attention. Lisa decided to find the highest point and climbed onto one of the structures. She started waving her arms when she heard shouts from inside the factory. Lisa, where are you? Jennifer shouted. Up here, on the roof, she replied, hoping her friend could hear her. Soon, Jennifer appeared on the roof, and together they began trying to attract attention. Suddenly, they heard the sound of sirens getting closer. We're on the right track, Lisa said, her heart filled with hope. A few minutes later, the police arrived and began to survey the area. Lisa and Jennifer raised their hands and shouted to catch their attention. The police quickly launched an operation. And soon they were inside the factory. Where are they? One of the officers asked as they saw Lisa and Jennifer. They're inside, Lisa replied, pointing to the doors they had come through. We need to stop them. The police, ready for action, entered the factory, and soon the operation to apprehend the members of the network began. Lisa and Jennifer watched with bated breath as everything unfolded. After a while, Bennett approached them, his face expressing relief. I've been looking for you. I thought you were gone. We're okay, Lisa replied, her voice trembling. But we need to help those in danger. At that moment, the police returned with detained members of the network. Lisa felt hope ignite in her heart. They had actually done it. Days passed, and they received news that the detained individuals would be held accountable. Lisa, Jennifer, and Bennett gathered together, discussing their next steps. We did everything right, Lisa said, looking at her friends. We not only saved ourselves but many others too. Yes, Jennifer agreed. But this isn't the end. We must continue fighting. And we will, Bennett said, his voice sounding confident. We need to help those who are still suffering. As time went on, Lisa realized her life was now filled with a new purpose. They created an organization that assisted victims and fought against crime. Lisa was full of energy and determination. She looked back at everything that had happened and realized that their struggle was not in vain. Every saved life was a victory. Every obstacle overcome was a step toward a brighter future. Now, Lisa knew her mission would continue, and she wasn't going to stop until she made the world a safer place for everyone. New challenges awaited her, but alongside Bennett and Jennifer, they were ready to face them. Lisa looked out the window at a world that was once again filled with hope. She knew everything would be all right. Their fight was just beginning, and they were prepared to meet the future with open eyes and full hearts.